Well, welcome to the course, Optimization in Finance. My name is Kourosh Rasmussen, and I'll be the lecturer of this course for the entire next 13 weeks. Well, today I'm going to present what you're going to expect from the course. So start with just a very small lecture, 10-15 minutes, going through the topics week by week, what you're going to expect from this course, and then also in general, what are the expectations that you should have from the course. And then I will jump into talking a little bit about the financial markets in broad terms. And then finally, I end up with actually getting your hands on some mathematical programming. And that would be more or less for the first hour where we are actually going to be filmed as well. And then after that, you're going to stay here for another 3 hours. And then we'll just work on the assignments. So let's get started with the first part, which is just the broad introduction to the course. Right, you've got these slides, by the way, also on your file sharing in CampusNet. So today, the first day, as I said, there's going to be an introduction to the course, plus there's going to be an introduction to GAMS, which is General Algebraic Modeling System. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that. Maybe I can get a show of hands who's already been programming in GAMS. Well, I mean, we're not assuming that all of you know GAMS beforehand. That's why the first three days of the course, we're going to start quite slow on GAMS. But obviously, those of you who don't know GAMS beforehand, then you have to probably run a bit faster to catch up with the other ones. So we're going to use this software GAMS intensively in this as part of this course, and starting actually from today, you will get to do your first exercises on that. More specifically, you're going to work with the mean variance model of Markovitch, which is an optimization model for asset allocation, which was already kind of invented back in 1952, so it's kind of the oldest optimization model in finance as we know it. Right. Next week, they're going to build on top of that model. So some of you who already had the course Introduction to Financial Engineering, I suppose I can see some faces. Can I again get a show of hands who had Introduction to Financial Engineering? Right, there are some. Again, these courses are supposed to be, the courses we have in financial engineering are supposed to be kind of standing on their own. So even if you haven't had Introduction to Financial Engineering, you should still be doing fine. But obviously, then again, you have some catching up to do. I'll get back to. I'll give you some links that some of you might be needing a bit more than some of the others who already had the introductory course. All right, but then I'm going to build on top of the Markovitch model that if you had already the Introduction to Financial Engineering, you've been introduced to that model. But from next week, we are building some assumptions on top of the mean variance model of Markovitch. We're entering into some practical constraints which are of great importance in real life, but you can't with kind of the methods that you've been introduced in the introductory course, you can't really solve those problems. That's part of the thing that you learn in this class to essentially tackle some real life problems when it comes to financial optimization. Right, and then we'll essentially use the next 2 sessions on extensions to the mean variance model. The practical extensions, practical real-life extensions, and while doing that, you'll also learn more about GAMS and working with that. And then we'll move into the area of fixed income. It's fixed incomes or bonds. Bonds essentially are the products which are used in financial markets to finance loans. So whenever you're taking a loan, could be a mortgage loan or it could be a bank loan, then there are bonds on the other side of the loan. So we'll be spending a couple of sessions on that. There will be a midterm project where you will be essentially working with what you learned in GAMS and also specifically what you learned about the fixed income markets, about the bonds. Then we have on the 15th of October is the fall break, where you essentially have also that week to work on the midterm project. You have to hand in by the week after, the 22nd of October. Then we move into scenario optimization, scenario generation. So now we're getting into some more advanced models compared to Markovich. We go back to the area of asset allocation. We'll focus the last part of the course on asset allocation. I'll introduce you to exchange-traded funds and feature selections, and that kind of brings you to the final project. You will have kind of enough knowledge to start with the final project of the course. But before that, so the way you will be examined in this course is there are two projects: a midterm project on bonds or the fixed income markets. Then there is a final project which is on asset allocation using exchange-traded funds as the underlying products. So you will work like an asset manager and use some of the models you learned about during this course to do your own asset allocation using GAMS as your software. But then you also, just before starting on your final project, I want you also to, in groups, each of you have to pick up one financial crisis that you fall in love with in one way or the other, and then you have to come and present it. So you have to pick up, there are so many financial crises. I don't know if any of you already have your own favorite financial crisis, but by 12th of November, you should have a pretty good idea and should be able also to present it. So I want you to explain like what went before the financial crisis happened, in which country or which region, what were the reasons, could it been avoided if circumstances were different, and so on. So that would be a short presentation of 10 to 15 minutes per each group. So that would be also part of your examination. And then after you hand in your final project, which would be maybe a week after the final day of the course, then there will be an oral exam, which is an individual basis. So everything else you do is in groups, and then the final exam would be, there would be also an oral individual exam in the end.
Which day is it? Do you know already?
Not quite sure, but we'll get back to that. I think there is a fixed day normally for the course. I'll find out and we'll let you know. All right. Now, this is a good slide to get back to. So this is kind of the topics that that you should know quite a lot about by the end of the course. So this is kind of a contract. I'm going to go through like 2-3 of each of these topics at each time there is a lecture. As you can see here, I'll be giving 8 lectures of about 1 hour each. And today, as you see, I'm in the middle of introducing the course. The other 2 topics I will talk about today would be financial markets in broad sense, and then the Markovich mean variance model. Then we'll go through all the other topics. Shorting, risk-free borrowing, trading sizes, solver statement are topics of next week, for example, and transaction costs, mean absolute deviation models for the week after that. And then we talk about bonds, interest rates, bootstrapping, dedication, interest rate risk, duration and convexity, immunization, and tracking models, value at risk, conditional value at risk. So yeah, scenarios, scenario generation using bootstrapping, and ETFs, feature selection using hierarchical clustering. So if you already know all these topics, then, well, you don't need to be here. But if not, then you're in the right place. Or if you think, you might not even by the end of today be quite convinced that, why would I exactly go through this, obviously. But hopefully by the end of the course, you should have a pretty good idea of in what way these matters come together and why I've picked that. There are so many other topics to pick up, and there are many of them also in the book called Practical Financial Optimization. So this is the book which I have recommended for you to read. So all these topics, not all of them, but most of these topics you can find in the book as well in great detail. But in the slides that is going to be presented to you, you are going to have kind of my version of those topics, and I'm going to also, you can look up these topics. You can look up shorting or risk-free borrowing or bonds. Probably there you can find lots of literature and lots of learning material on your own other places. So I also encourage you to do that. But the more optimization specific topics that I'll go through, they are all documented very well in this book. All right. So these were the topics. So what you should expect from the course. So what is this course actually about? You will learn about fixed income markets, and you will learn about equity markets. So these are the two major parts of financial markets. There are also other parts of financial markets, but we'll talk mostly about bonds and stocks, or indices of stocks and bonds. So this is kind of what we confine ourselves in this course. So I won't be talking about options and derivatives in this course. The focus is more on optimization and risk management, and less into going deep with different financial products. But obviously we'll be using some financial products, that being bonds in the one hand and stocks and indices in the other. Right, so a lot of focus on optimization modeling, with focus on risk management, be it on the bond markets and in the stock markets, and also on asset allocation in particular, where there will be a lot of focus towards the end of the course. You will learn a lot about how to model in GAMS, and get critical of analyzing your results in GAMS, so that's something that you have to focus on. Right, and then we will be using real financial data, both in the midterm project and in the final project. That I have some other also real, but maybe old financial data that we'll use for exercises. And then for the projects, essentially we get fresh data from different sources that I will introduce to you later on. Right, and finally, and quite important part of the course is essentially that you have to learn how to test your models and be critical of your results. So we will talk about in-the-sample testing and out-of-sample testing, which is about how essentially to convince, first and foremost, yourself that you have done your modeling work right, that your results make sense, and later on, if you're working as a risk manager, as a portfolio manager, how to convince your colleagues or your manager that essentially what you're coming up with makes sense, right? So that's a lot of discussion about testing, and that's what also you have to do for the final project of the course. Right, so how does it work? Some practical stuff. The course would be very, very much hands-on. So spend like 2-3 hours every time to program in GAMS and do the assignments. So I'll talk about 1 hour 8 times, and the rest of it is either doing assignments or working on your projects. Right? So there's a lot of work on your side. And we will have exercises every week. And 2 projects, as I mentioned before, and that you do in groups, a midterm project and a final project. And also each group makes a little presentation about a financial crisis. And finally, you will be examined orally, individually at the end of the course. Right, so that was kind of the end of the part 1. So there's actually one question there, yeah?
The size of the groups, how big?
Preferably 2 people for each group. That would be the right size. If there's 3 in some cases, that's okay, but most definitely, or preferably not 1. Yes?
And the oral exam, is that going to be about the projects or about the stuff we learned, like the theory?
Yeah, so the oral exam, the question was the oral exam, how that's going to work. So the oral exam is essentially just a 10-minute exam. Well, I will ask you questions from the 2 reports that you have handed in. So it's not so by the time you have handed in the 2 reports, you should be safe. You don't need to. I mean, I won't go kind of off track from that. At least not too much. Maybe testing a little bit your understanding, but I'll keep to the topics discussed in the 2 reports. Other questions about the setup of the course?